Welcome to Rappler presents HIPE Stories, a show about high-impact Pinoy entrepreneurs. In partnership with Rappler, we bring you the entrepreneurs who dream big, scale up, and pay it forward here in the Philippines. I'm Manny Ayala, and on the show today we have Nanette Medved-Po, the founder and executive chairperson of HOPE and PCX. HOPE is a B corporation with initiatives in education, livelihood, and the environment, while PCX consists of two companies dedicated to accelerating the transition to a circular economy and building a future where no plastic ends up in nature. Welcome to the show, Nanette.
Thank you, Manny.
You know, Nanette, my first encounter with HOPE actually was in a Starbucks, about over a decade ago. You know, because part of my Starbucks habit, my coffee drinking habit, is I have my little espresso and I have water, right? So I can't have just one or the other. It's got to be with water. And so it became my routine to have a espresso and this, right? This HOPE in a bottle. Except this is HOPE in a Tetra Pak now, right?
It's HOPE in a box, yeah.
In a box, sorry. And, you know, it wasn't until later that I realized that HOPE was connected to impact. Right? And when I realized it, I said, wow, what a great story. Other people should know this story.
That's why the front says that.
Discover your water, build classrooms. Okay, maybe I wasn't paying attention. But if you could just tell us your origin story. How did this idea come about? What was the big dream with this?
The big dream wasn't to come up with a water brand to build classrooms. The big dream was, how can you direct business towards social good? Mm-hmm. I think I grew up in an age, you and I are roughly...
I'm still your kuya.
The same age, yeah. Okay. You know, where businesses really were only focused on shareholder value, right? Yeah. They were thinking about profitability. Mm-hmm. And I think to a large extent, that's why we find ourselves in as much trouble as we do today, is because the focus has only been on shareholders and not on the broader stakeholder group.
That was Milton Friedman,
there you go.
The Chicago School. The only purpose of a business is to make money for shareholders, right? Which was
well, we realize now that that probably wasn't the best thing. And so, you know, I was in the US and inspired by a couple things. One was I saw Bono with his product Red, mm-hmm. you know, allowing for-profit businesses to do what they do best, but channel some of the funding from their sales of specific SKUs into, in his case, it was solving the problem of AIDS in Africa.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there was this famous case at HBS, you know, on Michael Porter, mm-hmm. And shared value. And I thought, you know, we should do this in the Philippines.
So tell me a bit about shared value and Michael Porter. What was his main message to business people?
It's basically the same thing. It's basically, look, you know, we have a shareholder universe and we should be trying to hit as many of those, benefiting as many of those as possible and not just shareholders. And so having seen how profitable it is in the corporate world, mm-hmm. And a little bit dysfunctional it is in the nonprofit world, the intentions are great, but they spend an inordinate amount of time fundraising so that very little time is spent on impact. So if you can kind of bring those two together in the same way that Bono mm-hmm. did, and your audience is probably too young to know who Bono is.
No, they know Bono, but as a retro idea.
As a retro, retro's cool. Okay, so, you know, I thought, I would love to find a way to convince businesses in the Philippines to do that, something like that, and maybe invest in education. You know, the Philippines. Yeah. I'm a big watcher of the Human Capital Index, and worry about how our lack of investment in education will impact, you know, the country's ability to grow and people's ability to progress. And so I thought, you know, education, you know, great return on investment.
That's super important. we see these very encouraging predictions, right, about the Philippines, that by the year 2050, because of our GDP growth and because of the demographic dividend, we'll be the 16th largest by GNP, right?
Yeah.
But there's an asterisk, right?
Yes.
If our education sort of
there's a couple ifs.
stays consistently good going forward,
We
right?
don't rank very well on the OECD, so and COVID set us back even further. So I think that there's a huge asterisk next to that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just thought, that would be a great thing for Philippine businesses to do, and so I came back and to Manila and tried to approach some of the bigger brands and said, hey, what if you not only looked at shareholder value but also invested in nation building and social good. This is the country that brought the world people power.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, let's use that force for good every day, right? That was the thinking too.
So that's the dream, right?
That's the dream.
Business for good.
Business for good, because I really do, I firmly believe, and I've seen this in enough cases, that businesses, when they choose to, are incredible forces for good. I mean, nothing moves with the efficiency of the market system, right? If you can direct the attention of businesses, of corporates, towards a social problem, I mean, they've got the skill sets in-house to address, I mean, that's what they do every day, is solve problems. What do people need, right?
So it's kind of like combining head with heart.
Correct.
Right? Commercial head with social heart.
So that was the thinking, right? And unfortunately, nobody was interested. This was back, I think, in 2010 or 2011, and everybody
so you tried to deliver this message to people?
I tried to talk to a few. I wasn't thinking that I should start my own business. I have zero right to be in a consumer goods business. I have no experience.
I think I saw an article where you said, well, I had a goal, but I didn't really know much about anything.
Not much. It's not that I didn't know much. I did not know anything. So I wasn't thinking, I didn't have that much audacity in the beginning. I said, other people should do this, but no businesses were interested. And so I literally birthed HOPE in a fit of anger. I was so upset. I said, why is nobody interested in this? Okay, I'm going to do this myself and show them. Right?
Okay. Tell me, that's an interesting name for a company, HOPE. Tell me about HOPE. Where did that come from? In this fit of anger, you came up with HOPE.
I think, and by the way, back when this happened, when I was still kind of conceptualizing this in 2011, headlines weren't anywhere as bad as they are today. But when you just think about it, the product we were selling wasn't water. It was the idea of hope. And what we wanted was, to sell is not the right word. We really wanted to promote the idea of hope, and hope in businesses delivering on things that people really care about in society, and that was what it was about. And today, it's taken on a completely different meaning. I mean, given the headlines, where it feels like the world. I mean, pick your Armageddon, right? I mean, there's so many out there. I almost feel like it's our duty to hope. Because if not, what else do we have? It's really bleak out there. Yeah.
Well, how did you choose water as your market entry strategy? I mean, of all the ways to enter the market to project this hope, right, and that businesses can do good, why water?
I want to say something inspiring, but it would be a complete lie.
It's okay.
It's lazy, right? Because, look, water is a commodity. I have no business in the consumer goods space. I didn't want to have to. There were too many places to fail, right? I'd have to think about trends and taste, and if it relied on the success of my ability to determine trends and get people to like my product, we were dead at the door, right? So I stuck with a commodity, water, and then decided, what is the best way? And back then, there were so many headlines, I don't know if you remember, about corruption in the Department of Education. And I said, what is the best way to invest in education where we could deliver transparency really easily. And anyone, whether you're a taipan, a tycoon, all the way down to, the guy who works in his garden, you could understand it. And it's a building, a classroom.
Yeah.
Easy to understand, right? It's tangible. You can touch it,
Okay.
you can.
So in my book, that's not lazy, that's clever.
Okay.
Right? I think,
my message is complicated enough.
Yeah.
I needed to simplify the offering.
Yeah.
Water equals classrooms. Simple. Water equals classrooms.
Does your water build classrooms?
Does your water
equals
build classrooms? Right? So water equals classroom. Super simple messaging. I felt like the simpler my message, the easier it was going to be to get across.
I think a lot of people get confused about this idea of risk as in the world of entrepreneurs, where they think, oh, if you're an entrepreneur, you got to take these massive risks. Actually, I think the most successful entrepreneurs are the ones who take very calculated risks or managed risk, which is apparently what you did, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was certainly, at the time, it didn't feel like a calculated risk because I was convinced.
It felt less risky than a calculated risk.
It felt more because, look, I was convinced that some headline, shortly down the road from my launch would be, what the hell was she thinking? What is an actress's right to be operating in this space, right? It was pretty audacious to believe that this could be done and that somehow I was the person to deliver it, I think.
Yeah.
So I felt like there was a there was reputational risk on my part. Not that I had some, amazing brand going on, but more that, what was she thinking, right?
Was it difficult to get this thing going? Did you have many sleepless, hair-pulling nights as you started this?
It was difficult. Look, every endeavor, every startup, every endeavor involves challenges.
Yeah.
I think it's the lens in which you view the challenge that determines whether it's difficult.
Yeah.
And you're going to pull your hair out. I don't think that ever happened in my case because I enjoy the problem-solving process.
Yeah.
And I'm just putting one foot in front of the other, saying, okay, this is the challenge in this moment. How do we solve this, right? And that's what I signed up for. And if you're not willing to sign up for that, you probably shouldn't be an entrepreneur.
And who was around you as you were building this, right? Because the early stages of a startup, right, they're
That's
exciting,
the key.
but
That's
they're very daunting at the same time, right?
Yeah, they are. No, so everybody talks about, well, what are your gaps?
Yeah.
Right. I had nothing. There were no gaps. This was just like there were no skills that I brought to the table. So, and the nice thing I think what saved me is the fact that I knew I didn't know.
Yeah.
That is huge, right?
Yeah.
So what I said is, since I don't know, let me go out and look for that talent, right? And so luckily for me, and maybe when the universe conspires sometimes, I reached out to initially a fellow named Ricky Gomez, who's no longer with us, who led San Miguel for a while. And when I met him, he had just retired. But he was involved in the water business on that side with Coke and all of that. And I told him my idea, and I said, Ricky, this is what I want to do. I want to sell water, and 100% of the profit is going to build classrooms. What do you think? And he was like, I never heard that before. He said, but he was really intrigued because he was at the point in his life where he was thinking about legacy.
Yeah.
And he had all the skill sets that I lacked. And so he said, you know what? I don't know that this is going to succeed, but it's going to be fun to try. He said, I'll help you. And so what he did was he surrounded me with a lot of resources that could deliver at least operationally,
Yeah.
what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
And that was a huge deal. And the truth is everyone he spoke to was kind of in his point in life where they said, look, we've spent all of our lives making money for some corporate out there to deliver shareholder value.
Yeah.
Let me now use those same skill sets and focus them on social good as part of how,
Fantastic.
my next phase in life. Because most of them retired for a job, but didn't
Yeah.
necessarily retire from life, right? And so these were, I call them to this day, my HOPE heroes. And if one of you goes over there, you'll see a cartoon caricature of the 6 heroes
Yeah.
that surrounded me in the early days: marketing, logistics, manufacturing, right?
Yeah.
Finance. Folks that were coming together to say, these are the things you need
Yeah.
to think about. None of them worked for me day to day,
Yeah.
but they provided the essential input.
But what I observe in a lot of the entrepreneurs we look at, right, is yes, as a founder, you need to surround yourselves with people that fill in the gaps,
Yeah.
right? So skills, but just as important, maybe even more, is that you're aligned on the purpose.
Yes.
And it sounds like with these heroes of yours, right?
That's what we had in common.
Yeah.
Everybody believed in the mission,
Yeah.
and that is what once you have the mission. And by the way, going back to challenges and difficulties in pulling out your hair, it makes it worth it when you have a mission
Yeah.
that is bigger, hopefully, than yourselves, right?
The founder of Endeavor, Linda Rodenberg, has this famous quote. She says, "Crazy is a compliment. If people aren't calling you crazy, you're not dreaming big enough." So I think if I observe what happened is you infected these retirees with this crazy idea.
Yeah.
So did people think they were crazy when they were
Yeah.
going about their business?
Yes. Well, that seems to be a theme in the last 12 years.
Yeah.
As you'll see in our arc from HOPE being just in the water space and kind of being opportunistically moving into additional spaces
Yeah.
until our latest creation.
Yeah.
It's all about, you're going to do what?
Okay.
How? You don't know how to do that, right? So I get that every couple of years.
So at what point did you feel that you had sort of perfected the recipe and
Okay.
you were now ready to scale up on the HOPE side? When was it?
That's
first year,
interesting.
second year, fifth year?
Yeah, so when I started, the concept of scale was nowhere on my mind. We weren't thinking about, we're going to be, the next Coca-Cola or whatever, right? That wasn't the aspiration.
Yeah.
The aspiration was simply to make a point that
Yes.
businesses that invest in social good would be rewarded by the market. And I was hoping that once I made that point, then I could quietly go away, because there's no way I know how to grow a business into, market share or anything, right? So I was really just trying to make a point, and then I thought I'd go away. And 12 years later, I'm still here, and it's become something very different than it was
Yeah.
on day one. And scale has become an incredible factor in our decision making after the water, right?
Yeah.
Because I wasn't thinking about. I'm hoping that we still get this water equals classroom
Yeah.
equation to scale. We still haven't done that. But everything else has been, unless we have a pathway to scale,
Yeah.
this is not worth the return
right.
on our time, right?
Yep.
So scale became an obsession after I realized how to do things with the water.
That's right. That's right. I mean, you just had your annual report, right?
We just did.
Earlier this year.
Yeah.
And you've accomplished some pretty amazing things on the HOPE side. Can you just tell us
Yeah.
what those were?
Yeah, it's not the scale we would like, but we've probably we built about 100. We've had about 130 builds around the
Yeah.
country, mostly in Mindanao, which is where DepEd has the biggest need. We've impacted maybe 40,000+ students.
Wow.
We've now we work with over 25,000 smallholder farmers in our agriculture initiative, and this year we will have given away for planting about 2 million free coconut seedlings. So
Wow.
it's as you can see, it starts with the classrooms and slowly starts to build and get better and better. We're learning as we go.
And yet you don't sit on your laurels, right? And so there was the HOPE story.
We're not even moving the needle.
And then there was another story that came out of this story.
Yeah.
Right, with PCX.
Yes.
So what's the origin story of PCX?
Well, when we started, HOPE in a bottle, and by the way, we still have an SKU in a plastic bottle.
Yeah.
I sit on the board of WWF, and years ago, we were horrified on the data that was coming out on plastic pollution. And so I came back to the office down in the dumps thinking, here we are trying to spend, expending all this effort to try and solve one problem in education, and then we're just creating another problem in the environment. So what's the point, right? So I was really distraught.
Wait, how bad are we in the Philippines?
Well, the World Bank says that we're the third worst offender for ocean plastic pollution globally.
Wow.
Behind China and Indonesia. There are some reports out there, for which I won't get into, that say we're number one, because the methodology is very different. But either way, that's a list you don't want to be at the top of.
It's kind of like who has the worst traffic, right? And
yeah, it's not a list that you want to be at the top of. So it's pretty bad. And I was concerned about, how we were contributing to that problem. And so I challenged the team. And that's the nice thing with a startup is you can be very agile and, fail quickly, move on, try new things, And so I challenged the team and I said, if we can't find a way to address our plastic footprint, what we're contributing to the environment, then we're not doing this. We're going to find something else to do.
Yeah.
And, you're all good athletes and we'll figure it out, right? That's kind of how I said it. And so we went to work. And it was a lot of learning on the plastic issue in general, where exactly the problem was, how could you address it. And the beauty of it was I was wearing several hats. One, I'm a brand. So you're always thinking about, well, how can I do this without breaking the bank, right? How can I take responsibility without having this new cost of doing business completely ruin my margins, right? That's one.
Yeah.
But I was also thinking about it from a WWF point of view. What is not greenwashing? What makes a real difference here, right? So kind of balancing those two were really interesting. And then the third hat became government. I had been spending, by that time, maybe 10 years working with different government agencies and understanding, well, what role could they play in this, if any, right? And what were their aspirations? And so kind of looking at it from those angles allowed us to settle, and I know that there are many environmental groups will say that that's the appropriate word, is that we are settling. How can we settle on a solution that is achievable, but is really making a difference?
Yeah.
And that's how we came up with our own plastic responsibility plan. There was no desire to come up with a new business.
Yeah.
So when I was able
Funny how that happens in your life.
I know. So what happened was, so what we did is we wound up cleaning up the equivalent of 100% of our plastic footprint. And by the way, doing all of this, there was no language around this back then. So we had to develop the methodologies and put the language together, build a standard, like all these things just for ourselves. Because it didn't exist yet. So this whole circular economy that everybody's talking about, it doesn't exist. The world is trying to build it, right? And so we found a way to be responsible, and I thought, wow, here is something. Not because, and I went out on Karen Davila's show with the president of WWF to talk about this. We didn't talk about it because we wanted to say, HOPE is anything special. Because we weren't. HOPE is a small player in a low margin business. Even if we take responsibility, the planet won't feel it. Nobody cares, right? The aha moment was, I'm a small player in a low margin business. if I could afford to do it, what does that say for all the other businesses out there?
Yep.
And if they could do it, the
Yep.
planet will feel it.
That's-
They could move the needle. And I'm simply saying, hey guys, guess what?
Yeah.
We may have discovered one path. If any of you are interested to find out, let me know. Happy to tell you about it so you can do it. Right?
You know, as an entrepreneur, you think, total addressable market. Oh, it's the entire collection of corporate enterprise around the world.
Correct. Look, when the world has 9 billion tons of plastic debt from 80 years worth of consumption.
Sorry, 9 billion
Billion tons
in debt.
of plastic debt from 80 years worth of consumption that's out there right now threatening the environment. The Lego.
This is the layman's way to think about that. We have 9 billion tons of plastic we shouldn't have.
Correct.
in the world.
No, and think about it. The coffee cup you used 20 years ago, or the car that you played with when you were 3 years old, is probably still out there.
Yeah.
Because only 9% of plastic ever produced has been recycled, in which case it's still out there. It's just circulating, right? This is a huge issue. And even if from now, if we reduce our plastic consumption by 40%,
Yeah.
by 2050, we would have added another 9 billion tons. This is a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And my being plastic responsible is
Yeah.
going to make no difference.
Yeah, yeah.
But if I could send this message to my total addressable market, but I wasn't thinking about that back then. But what happened was we were inundated with calls after that Karen Davila show. And they were saying, from far and wide, people from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, somebody from the US said, well, you did what? And how did you do it? Right? They just thought, this is very odd. Because so many companies have their 2030 targets.
Yeah.
They're going to be doing this by 2030, and absolutely no mechanism to get there. Nor do they want to build out an entire team in there. That's not their core competency, right? So they said, how'd you do it? Can we do it with you? Because we have our core businesses, and that's not it.
Companies calling
Companies who said, can you help us do it? Because we don't know how to do it, and you've done it. And so they wanted to make angkas, in a Filipino term. They wanted to make angkas on what we were doing.
Right, right.
And initially, I didn't think this was going to be a big thing. So we didn't have a new co. We had a no co.
Yeah.
We were just helping people until it became such a management distraction. Our bandwidth was... So I said, we need to set up a new co to help these guys. And that's how PCX started, as a nonprofit, just helping companies who said, help us with plastic responsibility.
So can I ask you how it actually works?
Okay.
Right, because you have a whole system of dealing with it.
Now.
That other companies saw fit to emulate, right?
Yeah.
What was the actual sort of operating model for that?
Look, in the beginning, we were everything for everyone. In the beginning, because, we just didn't know, there was no ecosystem, so we had to become it. So we wrote a standard for, plastic offsetting or crediting. We piloted a project, Aling Tindero, which lives today, but lives in another, in HOPE, which works with communities to do community collection of plastic waste post-consumer, and then sending it to processing partners for either recycling or energy recovery, whatever it is.
And the Tinderas earn money from that.
Yes, this was a huge deal, especially for the LGUs.
So it's cleanup plus livelihood.
Yeah, and more. So happy to get into that as well. But the truth is we did that, and then we went to the government and said, hey, this is what we're doing, just wanted, heads up. We worked with reporting, how we were going to report it with businesses, making sure we were navigating for what was allowed, right, all of those things. So we kind of built a blockchain platform, because I'm paranoid coming from WWF.
Wow. You built a blockchain platform.
Okay,
wow.
let me rephrase that.
That's cutting edge.
Okay.
Yes.
Microsoft heard what we were doing and they were like, oh my God, this is so exciting. This is the application that blockchain was built for, is traceability, right? And with a tangible product, that's very easy. And so they offered to build us the blockchain platform for free. And so our MVP came out of the
Wow.
Microsoft Innovation
Wow,
Labs.
that's terrific.
So we had everything. We had a public registry on blockchain. It was amazing. We built this ecosystem. It was small, but it had the seeds to scale. Because as your point, this is not just a Philippine problem.
Yeah.
And this is what all of our clients were telling us. Eventually they became clients. Look, we don't just have a plastic problem in the Philippines. We have it in Thailand and Indonesia and the US and Ghana, right, and Kenya. Help us, right?
So
And
that
that's
was
how,
that was the purpose, the first entity you created, right?
Correct.
To advise companies
Yeah.
as a nonprofit.
as a nonprofit.
Tell me about the for-profit bit.
Yeah, that was a stretch. So I was very concerned about having an organization that was going to make money
Yeah.
off of plastic responsibility. There's a part of me that just couldn't do it, right? So we were operating as a nonprofit, and a few things came up that made it clear that we needed to spin off some of the activities. One was governance.
Yeah.
You can't be like managing plastic credits and setting the standard and owning a project. The governance is all messed up.
Yeah.
So that alone required us to think about how do we split this business up. The other thing, so it's three things, so that's the first thing. The second thing is EDB from Singapore approached us because they were about to launch at that time the carbon credit exchange. And they do have a regulatory environment for credits. And so they came to us and said, we heard about what you're doing. Plastic credits would be an incredible dovetail for carbon credits, especially in a market where it's already being regulated. Please come to Singapore and set up your HQ in Singapore. So I thought about it, and I thought I'd really like this to be operating in a regulated environment. So I considered it, and I wanted to do a nonprofit in Singapore. And they said, no, no. It has to be a for-profit.
Yeah.
And they had a very good reason. And the reason is plastic credits is essentially an asset class.
Yeah.
You cannot transact that, at least not in a good way, out of a nonprofit.
Yeah.
People need to be able to sue you, right?
Yeah.
And so they made a very good argument for why it needed to be a for-profit.
Yeah.
I still wasn't convinced until the third point. I had a board member who I trust with my life. She is incredibly savvy in this space and sits on, boards overseas who are impact investors. And she said, I know how allergic you are to turning this into a for-profit. She said, but if you believe that you have part of the solution to this crisis, can you grow it out of a nonprofit? Sure. 5x, 10x, maybe even 20x. No problem. Grow it organically, sure. But the world's problems are millions of times X. So your decision is, do you want to help a little bit, or do you want to try and help a lot?
Yeah.
And if you want to help a lot, scale is where this is going to come from. And she said, you're going to need the right talent. You're going to need to invest in systems, right? You're going to need build a motor, all of those things, all of the things that startups think about. And she said, that's a decision you want to make. Help a little bit, help a lot, right? And so help a lot was what we and the team really wanted
And
to do.
when did you decide that?
So we spun that out. I haven't had enough tea yet, so the caffeine, I'm still a diesel. I want to say is it 2020? 2020.
Okay.
2020 is when that kind of came together in earnest.
And how's it going?
Oh no, is it 2020? It's only, Sebastian started, 2 years ago, happened a year before. Can you just check? But I want to say, yeah, it feels like it wasn't too long ago. But Singapore, EDB has been wonderful.
And so if the goal is all the way at the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, where are you in the ascent, you think? Right? With this, I mean, it's a massive goal, right? This is a global sort of ambition that you have.
It is. It is.
So that's why the summit is Kilimanjaro, right? But where do
Why
you think
not
you are?
Everest?
Sorry. Everest is a better one. Sorry.
Sorry, we're not dreaming big enough.
My knowledge of
You have
mountains
to.
isn't very good.
It's Endeavor.
Yes, Everest.
Okay.
There you go, Everest. Where do you think you guys are? What do you need? And what do you think the challenges are at this point?
Oh my God, nowhere near. Look, this is a nascent space. And we are flying the plane as we go, right? From a kind of enterprise building side. But the industry is as well, right? The space is coming together around us. We are extremely lucky, though, on timing, because the tailwinds that have come together to build out this space are phenomenal. Yeah. So one is consumers. Consumers really are demanding more responsibility from corporates, and plastic pollution is an important issue we found with consumers, right? And in the Philippines specifically, you have the Philippine prosumer, right? But even globally, I mean, the U.S. consumers are militant about what they care about, and they really want to see some change. So that's a tailwind that we're benefiting from. The second one is regulatory. The UN Treaty on Plastic Pollution is in full swing. And is supposed to complete at the end of this year. The last INC is in November.
Are you very involved in that?
Yes, I'm both on the country delegation for the Philippines as well as private sector as well as an official observer. So we're very heavily involved in drafting the policy. And this could, look, it took carbon decades to get to the Paris Agreement. This is taking plastic, it's going to take 2 years.
No, you've had some experience already here in the Philippines on changing the law.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, kudos to Philippine lawmakers. I mean, I know not everything goes right all the time.
Yeah.
And the law that has come out on EPR is not perfect, which I'm sure they also recognize, but it is bold. It is, in a way, you know, you see some bold legislation. EPR is growing around the world. I mean, countries are really, they're trying not only to get ahead of the treaty, but this is also important to them domestically. Kenya's got it, Rwanda's got it, Indonesia's got it, right? So you've got about 60 geographies around the world. So, I mean, Minnesota just passed yesterday, and the US is a voluntary market, right? I think the US now has 7 compliance markets. So what our job was to do is, because we were the first to do this in a voluntary capacity in the Philippines. So when Congress and Senate came together to really get serious about the EPR bill, I felt our job...
It's the extended
producer responsibility, which is specific to plastics, at least in the Philippines.
Which basically says, hey company, if you're polluting, you got to do this, right?
It's a producer pay concept, right? So I felt, as PCX, our primary responsibility to that process as part of the technical working group was to provide data. There's nothing like a decision that's driven by data. And a lot of countries, and I won't say who they are, came up with their legislation simply by having a bunch of lawmakers sit in the room and kind of put their finger in the air and say, this sounds like an ambitious goal, but with no understanding of what capacity was available in the market, so that you were setting up legislation for success and what the private sector could accommodate, like over what timeline. And so we provided that
very
data.
ivory tower musings, right? About
maybe just a little bit detached from what happens in the market is, is sometimes a mystery to lawmakers, right? And in the Philippines, that did not happen. Both the Congress and the Senate invited the private sector in, as well as environmental groups, to have a really serious conversation about how we put this together, what's achievable. It was watered down from what it could have been. But hey, it has still wound up being one of the most ambitious policies out there, especially in terms of timeline and scope for packaging. And this is not a country in Europe. This is the Philippines. And we're normally known for being one of the first, or at least the top of the list of the worst offenders. We're now being talked about globally as a country that came up with a solution. And of course, look, is it going to work? Only time will tell. It's early days.
Yeah.
Last year was the first year of compliance. But the truth is the Philippines has an incredible opportunity to lead.
Yeah.
And help other developing countries understand what it takes. Already now, the government is saying, we understand that there are holes in the current policy. What are the things that need to be introduced to tighten that up, right? It's not perfect. Everybody gets that, but rarely things are. So it's a start and improve as you go.
Yeah.
So, and we're helping in that process as well. We're trying to provide input from the market because we are a compliance partner now for EPR. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful more because it's such a great impact story driven by the market, to really bring...
I love it because it's existential and it's huge, so it's global.
It is, and it is a market-based mechanism, which I really believe in. Here you go, right?
Yeah. Hey, so I have 2 more questions before we wrap up.
Okay.
The first one is, if you were a budding entrepreneur and you were trying to solve social issues as well, it's hard enough to start a startup, right, which is a purely commercial startup, but one with a sort of impact dimension, right, is even harder. What would your advice to them be? It's like, it's like a beauty queen contest.
I know.
Question, but what should they be thinking about? Because it's not easy.
It isn't. And I know I'm now, I've reached the point where scale is an obsession, but this would be my advice. Start with something you're passionate about, a space you're passionate about impacting. And, scale isn't something you need to think about right away. You just put one foot in front of the other in the same way that I did. Learn.
Yeah.
Right? But I think what is hugely important, which is something that I learned, is you don't always wind up where you think you're going to be. And the opportunity to create big impact or meaningful impact sometimes doesn't lie where your passion is. It lies where the opportunity is at the moment. And I certainly did not dream back in 2012 that I would find myself in the trash space.
Yeah.
That was not my aspiration. But this is where it led me. And I'm finding that, it is where I am able to deliver, at least at my level, the most impact.
Yeah.
Right? And even if you just impact the community around you, your neighborhood, whatever, that's how I started, right? But at some point you become good at something and the opportunities present themselves, and be willing to, allow that tide to take you.
Okay. And finally, you get the last word, right? Which is, having done this for over a decade, right? So 12 years now.
Okay.
Right? With this amazing goal, business for good, right? Has the message changed, when you speak to the world out there, whether it's big corporations or change makers that are trying to do things, what's your message?
No, I really do believe more now than I did when I started that business can be an incredible force for good when it wants to. If we can just make sure that we are looking out not just for shareholders, but for, at least one or more of the other stakeholders in your universe or in your ecosystem, that is going to reap benefits, right? And whether you are, Fortune 500 or you are, one of these next-gen companies, if you can just think about that, the world will be better for it. And you are lucky to be living in a time where consumers actually care about this. There is enough transparency out there, social media for all its, pros and cons. There is enough information out there, there's enough transparency, there's enough traceability that you can support the things you believe in. And I do believe that there are a number of brands around the world who chase this and do very well. So please contribute to that.
Nanette, you've had an amazing journey, and it's clear, right, that your journey continues and there's bigger and more exciting things to conquer. So we'll be cheering you on as you head up to the summit of Mount Everest in your fight against plastic pollution and in your bid to improve educational outcomes.
Thank you,
Here
Manny.
and everywhere. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Manny.
That was Nanette Medved-Po, the founder of HOPE and PCX. Thanks for tuning in to Rappler Presents HIPE Stories. Follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Also, follow Rappler's YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. If you want to continue this conversation, you can do so in the Money chat room of the Rappler Communities app. Download on your mobile by scanning the QR codes below. It's available for download on iOS and Android. Just register for an account and click the Communities tab and join the Money chat room. I'm Manny Ayala, and you've been tuned into Rappler Presents HIPE Stories.